going to read through The Bright Lights of Sarajevo by Tony Harrison. This is in preparation for your Edexcel IGCSE English Language Exam, Paper 2. Let me just get my mic a bit closer to me. There we go. A little bit of background, just a reminder before I mention anything about the background. The mark scheme for Paper 2, Question 1, does not require any mention of context. So only mention context when it helps your analysis. It can really help your analysis, so don't be afraid of using context, but don't mention context just for the sake of it. Make sure it's helping you explain the poet's intention or the experience of the people within the poem and so on. So Tony Harrison was commissioned by the Guardian newspaper to cover the Bosnian War. So he actually went to Sarajevo during the siege in 1992 to 1996. And a result of that is this poem, The Bright Lights of Sarajevo. And the poem makes this clear anyway, but within that time, Sarajevo was really cut off from the rest of the world. So the roads were blocked, so it was extremely difficult to get in or out of the city, if not impossible. With that came a lack of resources. So we're going to see people who struggle to get the necessities that we take for granted: water, food, gas, and so on. But also their lives were at risk constantly. So I was just reading an article actually about how children were affected during this siege, and I read about a 3-month baby who was targeted by a sniper and killed. So that just gives you an idea of how brutal this time was. This was a horrendous time to live through if you were living in Sarajevo at this time. One thing to note about Tony Harrison, often his poems aim to give a voice to the voiceless. So you might argue his aim here is to give the Sarajevans a human face. It's really easy to look at victims of war as just that, victims quivering away, living in fear, completely helpless, completely dependent on others. And I feel like he's trying to give more of a human face in this poem, as well as mentioning the fact that they bring hope. He wants us to see them as human, and it's so easy just to see them as a statistic when we live so far away. So The Bright Lights of Sarajevo as a title, I would argue, has two main meanings. One would be it's a metaphorical bright light that the people represent. They bring hope through their resilience, through their love, through their heroic attempts of carrying on with life. And so we're encouraged to really be in awe of them in this poem. And of course, the bright lights could also represent the gunfire. And what you'll notice is Harrison does this throughout the poem, where he juxtaposes these two ideas that shouldn't go together. We've got these people living their daily life, flirting, dating, going out for coffee, right next to the horrors of war. So I guess he's trying to show here how these lives or these two realities of their lives intermingle. After the hours that Sarajevans pass queuing with empty canisters of gas to get the refills they will home in prams, or queuing for the precious meagre grams of bread they're rationed to each day, and often dodging snipers on the way, or struggling up sometimes 11 flights of stairs with water, then you'd think that the nights of Sarajevo would be totally devoid of people walking streets Serb shells destroyed. But tonight in Sarajevo, that's just not the case. So immediately, Harrison has created an image of suffering, an image of hardship. And how has he done that? Let's have a look at some of the language features. So we have language that suggests scarcity of some of the bare necessities that we take for granted. We've got empty, meagre, rationed. And obviously that links to the siege. Look at the nouns that he uses: gas, bread, water. So these are basic necessities that we take for granted, that are taken away, and that obviously creates a great struggle. Not only that, look at the verbs. We've got queuing repeated twice. That's their life. They queue for hours for gas. They queue for bread. And when they may queue for it, and then they only get a meagre gram or a few grams of bread. They're struggling. They're also dodging because they might be targeted by a sniper. So we have here a monotony to their day with the queuing, but also this danger, this struggle, this constant struggle, and this long list of things that they do on a daily basis creates this sense of how relentless this siege is, this war is. And as each kind of item on the list piles on, you can imagine the pressure piling on the people that lived through this time. Also note the emotive language used. A pram, for those that are American, is a stroller, and we link that to children, to babies. And it's just a horrible reminder that children went through that, and obviously children are a symbol of innocence, and a reminder that war doesn't discriminate between the old and the young. I read another interpretation of this actually, which was I think a very valid one. The fact that they're wheeling canisters of gas in a pram highlights how precious gas has become to these people. Just like a baby is precious, now these canisters of gas are precious to them in an equal sense. So that gives you again a sense of struggle. This whole image here happens in the day, and you might argue it's paradoxical considering later we find out how they behave in during the night. So daytime seems to be more dangerous, whereas darkness seems to bring comfort. It brings them anonymity, and obviously, for instance, protection from the snipers. So this is paradoxical. They shouldn't feel this scared in the day. And really, Harrison, you might argue, is highlighting how paradoxical war is. War just seems unnatural. It's not the way we're supposed to live. And so I think he's also kind of really talking about how war kind of disrupts the natural order of things. Notice the direct address. Who is Harrison targeting? I would argue it's a reader who has never experienced war. And again, it's this idea of bringing a voice to the voiceless, okay? Someone who's never experienced war might naively think that these are victims that will just be quivering in their homes, afraid to do anything, or unable to do anything. And I would argue he's targeting that reader because he wants to dispel those naive assumptions, and he wants to really raise the Sarajevans almost like heroes. He wants to inspire awe amongst the readers when we hear of the way they are, despite everything that they go through. And he is going to dispel all those assumptions, and that's indicated by the conjunction but. So we realise we're kind of being prepared, if you like, that all our assumptions are about to be debunked. Also, I haven't mentioned, the sibilants used in streets. There's a few S's that I didn't highlight here. So we've got an S here, an S here, and an S here as well. Sorry, I must have been rushing this one. But the repeated S sound creates a sinister tone, also a hushed sound, which represents fear. And that's the way we expect the Sarajevans to live. We expect them to be living in fear. But what we read next suggests that's not 100% the case. And note as well, thinking about the structure, think about why start with this image of suffering. Of course, we're about to find out that they still continue with their lives. They're very resilient. So starting with this image of suffering encourages us to feel even more surprised when we hear about the kinds of things that they do at night. The young go walking at stroller's pace, black shapes impossible to mark as Muslim, Serb or Croat in such dark. In unlit streets you can't distinguish who calls bread chleb or calls it kru. All take the evening air with stroller's stride, no torches guide them but they don't collide, except as one of the flirtatious ploys when a girl's dark shape is fancied by a boy's. So again, we've got this irony, haven't we, that darkness brings anonymity and a refuge from the ethnic tensions that were a big issue at the time. Be really careful. I've read previously from other students' work comments such as darkness brings peace. Be really careful not to belittle the tensions and the horrors of war. It's not so easy to be dispelled just by nighttime. So I would say things like it brings refuge, respite, it brings an escape or for a moment. Okay, these moments are short-lived. Just remember kind of the relentlessness of war. And notice also, in contrast to them dodging bullets, which was said in the previous stanza, now they're walking at stroller's pace. And we've got it here later, stroller's stride. I would argue that the sibilance here slows the pace. The sound is quite a slow sound. So that kind of represents how relaxed they are at night and how slowly they are walking. And it's wonderful here to see this romantic diction being used, flirtatious and fancied. So we've got a girl and a boy that have noticed each other, and it normalizes them. It makes them seem human. And like I said before, it's so easy to forget that war has a human face and get mixed up in the statistics of it all. So he's giving them a human face. They are human. They like each other. I feel like there was something else I was going to say. Oh, yes. Also notice, again, the dark shape. So it's just a girl's dark shape. That gives, again, this sense of anonymity, and that brings comfort at night. But also, I think he's trying to highlight that this happens to many people within this. It's not just a specific girl and a specific boy. He saw this a lot in the city, or people during times of hardship like this have that resilience in them. So I wonder if by keeping these characters anonymous, he's encouraging us to see the strength in just being human as well, rather than it just being specific to this moment in time. Okay. Then the tender radar of the tone of voice shows by its signals she approves his choice. Then match or lighter to a cigarette to check in her eyes if he's made progress yet. So they're being flirty, and he's giving her a match or a lighter to light her cigarette. So what do we notice here? I think this is really clever by Harrison. So he's used militaristic diction. We've got radar, signal, progress. But this is describing the way they're flirting. So here I would argue that the militaristic diction juxtaposes with this romantic moment, but it highlights that love is their weapon. The choice, and we're obviously going to read later, I'm sure you've read the poem already, of different weapons that cause great harm, great destruction, and these people choose love as their weapon. They're fighting the war with the resilience of their love. So I love this stanza, and I think the shortness of it is to bring our attention to that, and also the tension of this moment, this romantic moment where they're checking each other out and seeing if one likes the other. So they still go through the same feelings that teenagers or young adults do when they're courting. I would argue this is the first source of light that we hear about after the title, a match or lighter. So this is a symbolism, I would argue, that love is a source of light. So not only is it a literal source of light during this dark night, but it's also them flirting is giving some hope. It's giving some happiness to a life that otherwise is dreadful. And I see a pair who've certainly progressed beyond the tone of voice and match flare test, and he's about, I think, to take her hand and lead her away from where they stand on two shell scars, where, in 92, Serb mortars massacred the bread shop queue, and blood-dunked crusts of shredded bread lay on this pavement with the broken dead. And at their feet, in holes made by the mortar that caused the massacre, now full of water from the rain that's poured down half the day, though now even the smallest clouds have cleared away, leaving the Sarajevo star-filled evening sky ideally bright and clear for bomber's eye. In those two rainfall shell holes the boy sees fragments of the splintered Pleiades. sprinkled on those death-deep, death-dark wells, splashed on the pavement by Serb mortar shells. This is an ingenious stanza. So what do we have here? Yes, we have these two people that are flirting, but look at the backdrop of where they are doing that. So we have a reference or an allusion to the massacre that did take place in 92, where people who were queuing for bread were ruthlessly killed. Let's take this step by step. So again, we have, if we look in yellow, violent imagery and romantic imagery continuously juxtaposed. And you can look at this in two ways. It is the resilience of love. We've got this environment of terror. We've got this street that they're on that is full of reminders of the massacre, of the destruction of war. And the couple are still continuing to flirt, to get on with their normal lives, or normalish lives. So that highlights the resilience of love despite this horrible backdrop. But you could look at it the other way. They're trying to get on with their lives and do normal things that normal people do. But the reminder of the massacre, the reminder of all the terrible things that have happened here, is always going to be there. It's always going to relentlessly remind people. It's this deep scar of the city. So you could look at it in more of a pessimistic way as well. So let's have a look. So we've got this gory imagery, so this horror of war, of this massacre, the blood-dunked crusts. I think that's such a gory image, because when I think of dunked, especially because it's bread, I think of dunking bread into soup, and think about kind of how mindlessly you do that. And I think that's trying to highlight how mindless this was, how heartless it was, that they were treated in this way. Also notice it refers to the shredded bread. I would argue that's a euphemism, because we're talking about a bread shop queue that's full of people, and Harrison chooses to comment on the shredded bread. So if the bread is shredded, we can imagine what's happened to the bodies of the people that were queuing for bread. So has he used that euphemism because it is so gory he can't go into any more detail? Also look at how the city is personified. So it says here, on 2 shell scars. So clearly this part of the city has been bombed, and so we can see the impact of those bombs from 92. And he describes them as scars, just like human beings scar. And that suggests that, again, the memory, the destruction, the effects of war will stay with this city and its people for a very long time. Scars never go away. They might change over time, but they never go away. So it does suggest, despite the resilience of the people, they'll never quite get over this. Look at enjambment as well. The enjambment, I would say, highlights how the lives and the lives of the people and the terror of war are intermingled. I think this is an interesting piece of imagery here. So we've got this contrast between light and dark constantly. I'm just trying to find it. Where is it? Here we go. And so in those rainfall shell holes, the boy sees fragments of the splintered Pleiades. So this is a constellation of stars. And stars, obviously, symbol of light. It's romantic, this beautiful romantic imagery. But he sees them splintered, the reflection of them splintered in the rain. And I would say this is a hint that, yes, it's romantic. Yes, they're trying to move on. But war has injured the balance, the universe. It's almost kind of, it's injured the stars, at least in the reflection. So it's kind of, it's war ruins the order of things. Again, this natural order of the way the universe is supposed to work. We're not supposed to live like this. And I would say that Harrison is trying to highlight that through that imagery. Look also at the alliteration, death, deep, death, dark wells. So we have this beautiful star-filled evening, but it's kind of interrupted by that harsh sounding D to remind us of, again, the destruction of the bombing that has taken place previously. And the hyperbole here, I think, is to stress the extent of that destruction. It seems like it's as deep as a well, these kind of holes that have been created in the streets. And yes, literally they are deep, but also they're deep within the memory of the people that live there, and it's not going to be so easy to get over. I had something else to say. Yes, and again, the irony. So it's a star-filled evening, so you might think this is a beautiful romantic moment, but then again, it's juxtaposed with ideally bright and clear for Bomber's eye. So this is supposed to be a romantic moment, and it's interrupted by the danger of war. Okay, they can't really fully enjoy that star-filled evening sky for fear of their life. The dark boy shape leads dark girl shape away to share one coffee in a candlelit cafe until the curfew, and he holds her hand behind aid flour sacks refilled with sand. So we have this sense of protection. The dark boy shape leads dark girl shape away. Something quite traditional about that. You might say old-fashioned now. But the fact that they hold hands shows unity and love, a symbol of love, a symbol of unity during this harsh time. And we, again, have this romantic setting of a coffee in a candlelit cafe, but then we have the harsh reminder through the use of the consonants, the harsh k sound of the backdrop of war. They're sharing one coffee, more than likely not because they want to be romantic, because that's all they can afford, or that's all they can have, that's what's rationed. It's a candlelit cafe because they don't have the means to have electricity, or they don't want the lights on to become a target, and there's a curfew, so it highlights the restrictions of war again. And then we end on this note of them being behind the aid flour sacks refilled with sand. So again, we have this image of them being protected, but again, it's quite poignant, isn't it? It's really quite sad that they've got this romantic moment right next to these aid flour sacks. It reminds us the fact that of their dependency on outside support. So yes, there is this great sense of hope in this poem, and that's what Harrison wants us to see, and he wants us to have great respect for the people in this city for getting on with their lives so bravely, so heroically, but this normal behaviour that's juxtaposed with the violence of war, I would argue, it's also quite poignant. It's so sad that they've become used to this. This is their normal. So there's something really sad about that. And I just think about those images and think that's not the way people should live. And the fact that they're almost getting used to it and getting comfortable makes it seem even more tragic in some respects. That's maybe me looking at it from a pessimistic view. From an optimistic view, you would say, isn't it wonderful that they're fighting on? But I think there's something really sad about this last image, that war has become normal for them. War shouldn't be normal for anyone. Okay, looking at structure, we talked a bit about structure anyway, so remember that we start in this first stanza with this image of suffering, and that sets us up to feel surprised then about these lovers getting on with their normal lives, flirting and courting and so on. So the enjambment throughout shows the intermingling of daily life and war. It is written in iambic pentameter and rhyming couplets. There's a number of ways of looking at this. I've read quite a few, different interpretations. The iambic pentameter obviously is very controlled. Does that represent the restrictions on these people? Their lives are very controlled in this moment. Does it represent the relentlessness of war. It's every single day for 3.5 years, the same thing in and out. Or does it show the resilience of the people? They continue, they keep fighting. Are the rhyming couplets a representation of the heartbeat of the couple? The iambic pentameter as well, you might argue, reflects a heartbeat as well. So does it... Sorry, I should have said the iambic pentameter represents maybe the heartbeat of the couple. The rhyming couplet maybe represents the unity of that couple. So that's everything really with structure. But just remember, it begins with hardships, but it does end with a romantic scene, even if it is in the backdrop of this war and they're surrounded by sacks filled with sand to keep them protected. We do end with that vision of hope and hopefully a sense of admiration for the people living in this time who refused to not get on with their lives.